guys can take a seat. Well, hello, friends. So good to be with you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joe Ratterman, and I have the privilege of serving as the pastor here at Numa Community Church. And my question for you this morning is, does anybody like a good comeback story? Yes. Yeah. We love a good comeback story. Specifically, those sports comeback stories are some of our favorites. This last week, I was doom scrolling through Netflix, trying to find anything to watch, and found a new show called The Redeem Team. Has anybody seen Redeem Team yet? Let's go. Story of the 2008 men's Olympic basketball team coming back to get a gold after having lost the Olympics in 2004. Which, one of the nice things about not really being a sports fan is when I stumble across shows like this, it's all news to me. Like, I've never heard of any of these names, I've never heard of these situations, so it's probably like common cultural knowledge, but to me, it's like I'm hearing it for the first time. It's like, whoa, I had no idea that happened. And so I was watching the show, and apparently, U.S. has not always been dominant in basketball. For the earliest years of the Olympics, the U.S. was dominant with these amateur teams. But in 1988, apparently we lost. And it was like this huge deal. And so the NBA started allowing NBA players to play in the Olympics. And so the first year, 1992, that this happened was the year of the Dream Team, where you had the likes of Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Charles Barkley, Larry Bird. I mean, this was the best of the best NBA players coming to play the Olympics. And they absolutely dominated everyone by like a 30-point margin. They were winning like all these different games. Exciting, right? Sports. So I hear. But one of the unintended consequences of having these all-stars play on the Olympic stage is that the popularity of basketball just exploded across the globe. And so you've got these countries that are now putting together these national teams, and these national teams aren't like the NBA all-stars that are plucked from these like all-star teams. These are teams that are playing together like week after week, year after year, growing up together playing the sport, that know each other inside and out. And so each year, following the addition of the NBA players, the competition gets fiercer and fiercer and fiercer until the unthinkable happens on a worldwide stage. The U.S. Olympic men's basketball team loses in 2004. So this Redeem Team follows the story of the Redeem Team, the 2008 team that came to win the gold back. And it was really fascinating because unlike these other teams, the U.S. team had these all-stars plucked from different teams that didn't know each other. They didn't have that collective sense of team. And if they were going to win the gold medal back, they were going to have to do something they hadn't done before. They were going to have to put others first. They're going to have to learn how to play as a team. Well, if you guys are just joining us, we're in a series called One Another, in which we've been looking at these 59 one another's in Scripture, these commands like love one another, serve one another, be at peace with one another. These instructions that kind of serve as our instructions for life in community. What does it look like to be a we, to be an us, to be in community? And today, as you might imagine, the last category as we kind of wrap up this series, we're going to be looking at the command to put others first. Kind of this last bucket that we find of these other one another commands. And in like weeks past, I'm going to read a couple of them, and then we're going to do a deep dive into one of them where we'll spend most of our time. So the first couple you're going to find on the screen. And then, like I said, we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive. So the first one is found in 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul is writing to this early church in the city of Corinth. And he says this, he says, "But God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it. So that there should be no division in the body, but each part should have equal concern for each other." The Greek word for one another. "If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it." Paul gives the example of a body, how each of us are like the different parts of a body. In the same way that if you were to injure your arm, you would feel it in your entire body. Your body would pool its resources to try and heal that arm. In the same way, in a community, when someone is suffering, we pull our resources together to try and help that person in. We all feel it. And then on the flip side of this, as he says that just as one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. In the same way that when you get a massage or a manicure, like you feel it in your whole body. You feel lighter, you feel good. When somebody in our community is doing well, when others are at their best, we celebrate, we feel it. We're like a body in that way. The second passage we're going to be looking at, it's Peter's first letter, where he writes this. He says, "All of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another. because God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand that he might lift you up in due time. We're commanded to have a humility towards one another. And the reason being is that God actually opposes those who are prideful, but he raises up those that are humble. So we are to show humility as we work amongst one another. And then lastly, this is the passage we'll spend most of our time in this morning. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open those up, turn them on, swipe or scroll. Feel free to grab one of our paper Bibles. It'll be on page 551 if you're using one of those. Otherwise, we're going to be in Philippians 2, starting in verse 1. Once again, this is Philippians 2, verse 1. And to give you a little bit of context before we dive in, this is Paul's letter to the church of Philippi. It was a church that he planted during his second missionary journey around AD 51. And so this is a group of people that he has incredible fondness for. We find it all throughout this letter. He loves these people. He remembers their time together, and they're doing a lot of things right, but there's this kind of one area that he really camps out on, an area that we're going to be reading today. So it's found in Philippians 2, verse 1. He says, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one of mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. This is a passage in which Paul is offering some things. Maybe in modern English, he says, if you've received any blessing, any benefit from this following Jesus, make me even more proud by being united, by being one with one another. He says, don't allow things like vanity or selfish ambition cause division, but rather in humility value other people above yourselves. You know, he's got all these positive things that he's encouraging them to go after, things like love and tenderness and compassion and valuing others. But he also mentions maybe two things that get in the way of that. Two things that get in the way of putting others first. You probably spotted them in verse 3 as we were reading it. First was that selfish ambition. And then second was vain conceit. That word selfish ambition comes from the Greek word arathia, which has kind of the sense of hostility, but maybe not openly like waging war or attacking someone, but more so just being against others. It's kind of a me versus other people. It's looking after your own interests, often at the expense of others. And so in this community, he's describing a reality in which people are going after their own ambitions and ignoring the needs of the community around them. That's kind of that word, selfish ambition. The second word is what he translates vain conceit, is the Greek word kenodosia. It's actually a compound word, keno meaning vain or empty or void, and then dosia meaning glory. So effectively empty glory, like it's meaningless, it's nothing, it's empty. That would be those that would have their kind of sense of self or reveling in themselves, and he's saying there's no glory there, that's empty. So that'd be kind of like vanity or just being really concerned about yourself. So if you think about his community, he's describing a world, if you can believe it, where people only thought about themselves. It was a day and age in which people put their own personal ambitions ahead of a collective we. It was a day and age in which people were so concerned about their own image and what people thought about them that they were less concerned about the world around them. Can you imagine a world like that? A world like that existing? Can we be honest for a second? A lot has changed in 2,000 years, but this has not. As much as he's speaking to a me-first world in that day and age, we live in a me-first world. It's just the water we swim in. We take it for granted. We just assume that's the way that things are. A world in which we are looking out for our best and our family's best and our little castles at the expense of the world around us. Some things we take for granted. Think about things like social media. Just the idea that we have hundreds, maybe thousands of people that like and comment and care about what we ate for lunch, our latest outfit, our latest outing. Like, what does that do to us subconsciously to live in a world where people are concerned about every minute detail in our day? We live in a me-first world. Think about some of the stories that we get most excited about, the stories of like kind of rags to riches, these people who have made something of themselves, gone from nothing to something, that have worked some like 60 to 80 hours a week to make something for themselves. Like we celebrate those kind of stories. We live in a me-first world. Or just think about the culture of comfort and convenience that we live in. We want things now, we want what we want, and we want it delivered to our door within 24 hours. We want things comfortable. We want things to be exactly 72 degrees. We push off anything that makes us uncomfortable or offends us. We live in a me-first world. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge this and name this, because if we don't, we might give like kind of a little nod to the passage like what we just read, say, yeah, that's true, that's great, but still believe secretly in our hearts that me first works. That me first is better, that if I don't look out for me, then nobody else will. And in doing so, we can agree with passages like this, but then in practice, completely ignore the command to put others first. But I think when we pull back the curtain a little bit on this me first world, it doesn't work. If you think about things like social media, how often is our mood influenced by how popular our post is? Like you might have felt really great in that outfit or that activity, but it didn't get as much engagement, and maybe now you feel like that was a less than experience. Or think about some of the influencers that we follow on social media with the perfect house and the perfect spouse and the perfect lives. We know that's not real. The other day I was talking to a friend who his wife is a friend with an influencer, and that morning she had posted like this incredible picture of a living room, like light coming in, everything decorated, everything in its place. And then his wife went over to her house later that day to go like hang out, and she walks in and the house is trashed, like so dirty. And to the left of the door is just piles of boxes of things that she's supposed to promote because she's an influencer, just like left in their plastic, like all next to it. But as you scan over to the living room, there's that corner of the room, like in a perfect iPhone camera width, immaculate, while the rest of the house is a mess. That's real life, right? That's the life that we live in. That's why it's so attractive when we see it on the screen. And then even just thinking about the lifestyle, constantly responding to DMs, constantly trying to curate your life, constantly trying to present an image to the world. It's exhausting. Me first doesn't work. Or you think about some of those rags to riches stories. I mean, me as an achiever, kind of going after things, I was really attracted to stories like that. But the more and more that I meet those people that have made it, the more and more I've realized that they are exhausted, stressing and striving and trying to hold on to this thing that they've worked so hard for. It's not nearly as lucrative as it appears. In fact, many of those people are miserable. Or if you think about this world of comfort and convenience that we are like so going after, often at the expense of being really isolated as people, of pushing others away, of the messiness of relationship doesn't fit into this comfort and convenience. I mean, I was reading this the other day that the United States is the second highest rate of depression in the entire world, second to Ukraine. That's wild. Me first doesn't work. And we need to stop buying into the lie that me filling myself up and me being happy is going to make us happy, because it doesn't. So with that as kind of a backdrop, what I want to do is read that passage again, but this time not as words that were written some 2,000 years ago to a different group of people, but as if Paul was reading these words to us today, speaking to our context and the lives that we live the other Monday through Saturday days of the week. I want you to imagine if Paul was writing these words to you. And I'm going to read the passage in its entirety. So Philippians 2:1, he says this. He says, "Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing of the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one of mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus Christ, who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in the appearance of man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father. Doesn't that feel like a breath of fresh air? Like a drink of cool water in a me-first, thirsty world? I mean, if you think about this, Paul gives the example, the other half of this passage we didn't read before is that Jesus is our example. That even though he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings, the Alpha and the Omega, through whom and for whom everything has been made, higher than any other name, he came to be with us. He came in the form of us. He came to be like us. And look at the way that he spends his time. He spends all of his time with the least and the last and the lost. He takes the form of a servant, serving those around him. Jesus is our example. That even though his name above all names, he should receive all praise and all glory, he takes the form of a servant to meet our needs and to care for us. Jesus put others first. It's funny that term Christian, you may not know, originally the term Christian was a derogatory term. So like Roman writers and scholars, as they were observing this phenomena, this religious sect in the first century, they were doing some very strange things. They were selling their things to help those in need. They were often when the pandemic would come in and like wipe out a city, they would be the first ones to swoop in and care for the sick and the poor. And kind of observing this, they're like, these guys are kind of like this Jesus guy. They're kind of like the Christ, as they call him. So they called them Christians, which means little Christ. And so that name kind of stuck. We're like, we like that. But that's our example. That's what we're called to be, is to be like Christ, to be little Christ. And that is our example here, is putting others first. And when we do that, we find it's not just like we're called to and we're supposed to, but life works better when we put others first. Life is better when we put others first. We find some of the things that we've been looking for, things like joy and peace and purpose and meaning as we serve, as we put other people's needs ahead of our own. We find we get filled up as we pour ourselves out to those around us. You know, I think back to that 2004 Olympic team. The thing that they really struggled with is they were the best at what they did, each of them in their own spheres. And up until that point, all they'd been concerned about was their own fame, their own contracts, their own kind of self-image. But one of the things that Coach K did, the coach of Duke, who coached that 2008 Olympic team, he wanted to remind them of the collective we, wanted to remind them of what they were fighting for. And so every week during practices, he would have servicemen and women come in who had fought in a war or gotten injured protecting our country. And he'd have these people come in and remind these people what they were fighting for. Remind them of a collective we, what it was to be a part of the U.S. Olympic team. And over the course of the documentary, you got to see their egos kind of come down. They kind of stopped trying to puff themselves up and were really concerned with those around them. And surprisingly, you find some of these players like Kobe Bryant, who had been kind of closed off and been pushing others away, just starting to lighten up, to soften, to have joy as he's getting to play for something bigger than himself. And of course, they go on to win 2008. It wouldn't make a great documentary if they didn't win, but they go on to win. And it was just such an example of I think, what we experience. That Christianity it's not an individual sport. It's a team sport. That when others win, we win. That's what happens when we put others first. You know, we don't need an example. We don't need a list of examples. We don't need to be told what that looks like. I mean, it really is as simple as putting others first, of thinking about others before yourselves, of letting go of some comfort and convenience for the comfort and convenience of those around us. What would it look like this week to live that out as we have our interactions with people throughout this week, to just have that kind of mindset shift of put others first? One of the challenges of being a pastor is I sit in this text for 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, I've been living in this idea of putting others first, and I can't tell you how many moments I've had over the last 2 weeks where I've realized how selfish I am. There's just been moment after moment where I'm thinking about there's a moment of like, I could do this or that, and I have to like have this internal dialogue of, no, what does it look like to put others first? In this moment, what does it look like to set aside my needs and my conveniences for the sake of others? And that's my hope for us, is that this coming week, you would have that same kind of, that feel of what would it look like to put others first? And to kick it off, as you know, we're kind of an interactive church, and we want to give people opportunities to live this out. I'm going to invite Julie to come up, and she's going to lead us in one last song. And what I would love for you guys to do at your tables is, rather than praying for yourself, which maybe you're really generous and you normally pray for other people, but in this moment, as she's playing this last song, I would love for you guys to pray for the people around your table. For any of the introverts out there, we're not praying out loud, so you're going to be quietly at your table. But without asking any of the people around your table what they want prayer for, even if you don't even know their names yet, would love for you guys, just during the length of this next song, is to pray for God's best for each person around their table. Pray for God's protection, God's peace, breakthrough, God's blessing. Without them ever even knowing exactly what you prayed for, nobody else can hear it. But at your tables, what would it look like to pray for each person around your table? And if you run out of that pretty quick, look to the table to your next and start praying for each of those people. But my challenge for you is, during the length of this next song, is to spend your time praying for God's best for each of the people around your tables. Does that sound good? Cool. I'll pray to kind of kick us off, and then I'll come back up to close us out. Well, Abba Father, even just as I was reading that text this week, just the idea that you, the name above all names, the one most deserving of honor and glory, would lower yourself to serve us, ultimately to die in our place so that we could become right with you. I don't deserve that. The only proper response to that reality is just sheer humility of, who am I that you would do that for me? And God, if you would do that for me and for us, how much more should we put others first in our lives? And so right now, during this last song, I just pray, would there just be moments of aha and moments where you just remind us of just how good it is to seek the best of those around us. Would you draw things to mind, things to pray for, things that we weren't even thinking of? And we ask these things in your Son's holy and precious and mighty name.